A single father walks into a coffee shop, expecting an awkward blind date. What he finds instead is a woman in a wheelchair, tears streaming down her face, begging him to leave before he can reject her first. She'd been lied to. He'd been lied to. Both set up by a well-meaning friend who thought he knew what they needed. But when she breaks down and tells him exactly why she can't survive another person who pretends to care, his response changes everything. Before we continue, please tell us where in the world are you tuning in from. We love seeing how far our stories travel. The Meadowlark Cafe in Portland's Pearl District had wide aisles and accessible seating. Torrin Gray didn't know that when he arrived 15 minutes early on that October afternoon. He just knew his hands were sweating, despite the cool autumn air, and he'd checked his watch at least 20 times in the past 5 minutes. He ordered a black coffee, something simple, something safe, and claimed a corner table. His best friend Stellan Rylan had insisted this would be worth it. Just one coffee, 1 hour. Trust me, man. Torrin had agreed because saying no to Stellan was like arguing with a hurricane, exhausting and ultimately pointless. When the door opened and Veda Brooks rolled through in her wheelchair, Torrin noticed the hearing aids first, visible behind her hair. Then he saw her face, warm brown eyes scanning the cafe with visible caution. Those eyes landed on him, clearly able-bodied, clearly hearing, and something inside her shattered. Torrin stood instinctively, offering a small wave. Veda didn't move toward him. She sat frozen in the doorway. Even from across the room, Torrin could see her chest rising and falling rapidly, could see devastation spreading across her features like ink in water. He approached slowly, his hands already moving into signs as he spoke. "Veda, I'm Torrin." Her eyes widened at the sign language, but instead of relief, fresh pain crossed her face. Her hands came up, trembling violently as she signed back. The movements were sharp, angry, desperate. "Did Stellan tell you? Did he tell you about me before you came?" Torrin signed honestly. "He said he knew someone special. That's all." Veda's laugh was bitter and broken. She signed rapidly, tears already forming in her eyes. Of course he did this. He told me I was meeting someone exactly like me, someone who would understand, someone who—" Her hands faltered midair. "Someone who wouldn't see me as pathetic." "Veda," Torrin began, but she cut him off. "You can go." Her signs were shaking so badly now he could barely follow them. Tears streamed freely down her face. People were starting to stare. Conversations quieted, heads turned, but all Torrin could focus on was the raw humiliation in Veda's eyes, the kind of pain that came from being hurt too many times before. "Please." Her signs became more desperate, more frantic. "Please just go. Save us both the embarrassment. I've been through this before, the awkward politeness, the forced conversation, and the relief on their face when it's finally over. I can't do it again." She covered her face with hands then, her shoulders shaking with sobs she couldn't hear herself making. When she signed again, her movements were jagged with emotion. "I thought I was meeting someone who would actually understand, someone like me, and instead it's just another setup, another person who's going to pretend to be interested for an hour and then disappear. I'm so stupid. I'm so stupid for believing Stellan when he said—" Torrin did something then that surprised even himself. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, stayed directly in her line of sight. Then he began signing, his movements deliberate and clear. "You're right. Stellan didn't tell me everything. He should have been honest with both of us." He paused, making sure she was watching. "But I'm not here out of pity, and I'm not leaving." Veda looked up, her face wet with tears, confusion mixing with her pain. "Why?" she signed. "Why would you stay? You could walk out that door right now and forget this ever happened." "Because I know what it's like to be set up by well-meaning friends who think they know what you need. I know what it's like to feel like you're being managed instead of respected. And I know what it's like to be so tired of people's pity that you'd rather be alone then face one more sympathetic smile. He leaned forward slightly. The cafe noise faded into background static. It was just the two of them now, having a conversation in silence that somehow felt louder than words. My wife died 3 years ago. Torrens signs were steady, despite the old grief behind them. And for 3 years, everyone has tried to help me move on. Blind dates, setups, concerned looks at parent-teacher conferences, everyone treating me like I'm broken and need fixing. Veda's hands had stilled. Her attention was fully on him now. So, I get it. I get feeling tricked. I get being angry. And if you want me to leave, I will, no questions asked. But if you're willing to start over, not as Stellan's matchmaking project, but as two people who both got ambushed and might as well get coffee out of it, then I'd like to stay. For a long moment, Veda just stared at him. Her breathing was still uneven. Her face was still wet, but something in her expression shifted, like clouds parting just enough to let through a single ray of light. "You really know ASL," she signed slowly, like actually know it, not just fingerspelling hello and thank you. "My mom is deaf, been signing before I could walk. It's my first language." The change in Veda's face was subtle but unmistakable. Not quite trust, but maybe the possibility of it. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, trying to compose herself. "I'm sorry," she signed smaller now, less frantic. When I saw you, when I realized Stellan had lied and you weren't disabled at all, I thought that I was going to take one look at you and run," she signed gently. She nodded. "I get it. People can be cruel. But for what it's worth, when I saw you, I thought Stellan had drastically undersold how pretty you are. And then I thought, great, she's going to think I'm an idiot who can't string 2 sentences together." The smallest smile tugged at Veda's lips. "You were nervous?"
"Terrified," Turin signed. "I haven't been on a date in 3 years. I have no idea what I'm doing. My daughter had to help me pick out this shirt." Veda's smile grew slightly. "How old is your daughter?" It was that question, simple, curious, human, that broke the remaining ice between them. Turin pulled out his phone and showed her a photo. A 7-year-old girl with wild curls and a gap-toothed grin, holding up a papier-mâché volcano. "Her name is Amalia. She's learning ASL from my mom, but she's still pretty rusty." "So you told your 7-year-old about this date?" "She's my entire world. I tell her everything." "Well, age-appropriate versions of everything." Veda studied the photo for a long moment. When she looked up, her eyes were still red-rimmed but calmer. "Stellan told me you were a widower, that you understood loss. That's why I agreed to meet you." She signed carefully, precisely. I thought maybe you'd understand what it's like to have your whole life change in an instant." "Tell me," Turin signed. And so she did. 5 years ago, Veda had been 26 years old, engaged, working as a junior graphic designer at a tech startup. She loved hiking, especially in the Columbia River Gorge, where the waterfalls cascaded through ancient forests and the trails wound through landscapes that felt prehistoric. It was supposed to be a perfect day. She and her fiancé Andrew were tackling Eagle Creek Trail. The weather was ideal, clear skies, mild temperatures. They'd done this trail a dozen times before. "The section near Turnell Falls," Veda signed, her movements becoming more hesitant. "There's a part where the trail is carved right into the cliff face. Beautiful views. I'd stopped to take a photo. Andrew was ahead of me. I stepped back to get a better angle and—" She didn't need to fish. Turin could see it in her face.
40 feet, she signed. That's how far I fell. Spinal cord injury, traumatic brain injury, fractured skull. They told Andrew I might not survive the first surgery. When I did survive, they said I'd probably never wake up. When I woke up, they said the paralysis might be permanent. Her hands moved faster now, like she needed to get it all out before she lost courage. My hearing started going 3 weeks into rehabilitation, gradual hearing loss from the head trauma. Within 6 months, I'd gone from completely hearing to profoundly deaf,
Had to learn sign language while relearning how to exist in a body that didn't work the way it used to. "And Andrew?" Torin asked gently. Vita's smile was sad. "He stayed through the first 3 months, visited every day, held my hand, said all the right things. Then, one day, he sat down next to my hospital bed and told me he loved me but couldn't handle the changes, that he'd signed up for a different life, a different partner." She looked directly at Torin. "He left me in a rehabilitation center, barely able to dress myself, learning to be deaf, learning to use a wheelchair. Said he'd always care about me but couldn't be what I needed." "That's why Stellan set this up," Torin signed slowly. "He's trying to make up for his cousin's behavior." Vita's eyes widened. "How did you—" "You said Stellan told you about me understanding loss, and you mentioned Andrew. It wasn't hard to connect the dots." Torin paused. "Stellan's been my best friend since college. He's mentioned his cousin Andrew exactly once. Said Andrew made the biggest mistake of his life, and Stellan's been trying to fix it ever since." "By lying to both of us?" Vita signed with a hint of her earlier bitterness. "Great plan." "Yeah, Stellan's going to get an earful from me later." Then, more gently, "But terrible execution aside, maybe he had a point about us understanding each other's worlds."
Vita studied him for a long moment. "You said you're a physical therapist?" Torin nodded. "At Cedar Hills Rehabilitation Center. I work with patients recovering from injuries, learning to adapt to new physical realities." He paused. "Actually, you might have been treated there. It's the main facility in Portland for spinal cord injuries." Vita's hands froze mid-sign. "Cedar Hills Rehabilitation Center? That's the one. That's where I did my rehabilitation." She signed slowly, deliberately. 5 years ago. Those were the worst months of my life." A pause. "And the best, in a strange way. Learning who I really was underneath everything I'd lost. Something passed between them then, an understanding that went deeper than words or signs. They'd both been shaped by that building, by those parallel bars and therapy rooms, and long hallways where people learned to walk again, or learned they'd never walk again, or learned that walking wasn't what defined them after all." They ordered second coffees, then third. Torin told her about Maria, about how his wife had fought cervical cancer for 18 months before it finally won, about the medical bills that had drained their savings, about Amalia, who'd been 4 years old when her mother died, and spent months asking when Mommy was coming home. "I wake up at 5:30 every morning," he signed, and in that moment the exhaustion was visible on his face. "Make Amalia's lunch, lay out her school clothes, make breakfast. I'm at work by 7 for my first shift. My mom picks Amalia up from school. She's been deaf since birth, so Amalia's growing up bilingual like I did. Evenings are homework, dinner, bath time, bedtime stories that I sign and speak simultaneously. I collapse into bed around midnight and do it all again the next day."
"That sounds exhausting," Vita signed. "It is." Torin's smile was tired but genuine. "But it's also everything. Amalia is the reason I get up every morning. The reason I keep going even when I'm so tired I can barely see straight." "That's what Stellan was talking about," Vita signed thoughtfully, "when he said you needed to start living again instead of just surviving." "Probably. He's been on my case for months. Every Friday, he shows up at the park while Amalia plays and lectures me about how Maria would want me to be happy." Torin paused. "He's not wrong. She did. She made me promise near the end that I wouldn't shut myself away forever. But promises made to dying people are complicated," Vita signed. "Yeah, they are." They talked until the cafe staff started giving them pointed looks about closing time. 3.5 hours had passed without either of them noticing. As Torin prepared to leave, he needed to pick up Amalia from his mother's house. Vita caught his hand. She looked up at him, her brown eyes serious. "Thank you," she signed with her free hand, "for staying, for seeing past the wheelchair and the hearing aids to the actual person having a breakdown in a coffee shop." "Thank you for giving me a chance after the world's worst setup," Torin signed back. "And for the record, The person I saw wasn't someone having a breakdown. It was someone who's been hurt before and was brave enough to show up anyway. That takes real courage. The kind that has nothing to do with what your body can or can't do." Veda laughed, the sound uneven and unmodulated, but completely genuine. It made Torrin's chest feel lighter than it had in 3 years.
"Would you want to do this again?" he signed. "Actual date this time. No Stellan involvement whatsoever." "I'd like that," Veda signed, her smile reaching her eyes now. "But fair warning, next time, I'm going to complain about Stellan the entire time." "Deal. I'll bring a list of all the ways he's terrible." They exchanged numbers, made plans for the following Wednesday. Torrin left the cafe feeling like something fundamental had shifted in his world, like he'd walked in expecting duty and walked out with possibility. The following Wednesday they met at a fully accessible art gallery downtown. Veda gave him a tour of her favorite pieces, explaining composition and color theory with such passion that Torrin found himself seeing art in completely new ways. They had dinner at a restaurant Veda had vetted beforehand. Wide aisles, accessible bathrooms, staff who didn't treat her wheelchair like a fascinating curiosity. Their third date was a cooking class at Torrin's apartment. Veda had admitted she rarely cooked anymore. Her kitchen at home wasn't fully accessible, and she'd gotten into the habit of eating pre-made meals. Torrin spent the afternoon rearranging his kitchen, lowering ingredients, making sure everything was within reach. They made pasta from scratch, flour dusting every surface, laughing when the dough stuck to everything except where it was supposed to. "This is the most fun I've had in years," Veda signed, her hands covered in flour. "Even though the pasta looks like modern art," Torrin signed back, "especially because the pasta looks like modern art." On their fifth date, Torrin introduced Veda to Amalia. He had been nervous about it, terrified actually. Amalia was his entire world. If she didn't like Veda, if this was uncomfortable or awkward, but Stellan had pointed out that he couldn't keep his dating life and his daughter life separate forever. If this is going somewhere, and man, from the way you talk about her, it is, then Amalia needs to meet her eventually. Better sooner than later. So Torrin invited Veda to the Portland Children's Museum on a Saturday afternoon.
Amalia spotted the wheelchair first. She'd been taught from a young age, courtesy of her deaf grandmother, that different didn't mean scary. But she'd never met someone who used a wheelchair before. "Hi," Amalia said shyly, then attempted to sign it. Her hand shapes were wrong, but the effort was there. Veda's face lit up. She signed back, slowly and clearly, correcting Amalia's hand position gently. "Hi, it's very nice to meet you." "You know sign language like my grandmother." Amalia's eyes went wide with delight. "I do. Do you want to practice with me?" That was all it took. Amalia spent the next 3 hours peppering Veda with questions about her wheelchair. Does it go fast? Can you do wheelies? About her hearing aids. Do they hurt? Can you hear music? About her job. You make pictures on computers? That's so cool! Veda answered every question with patience and honesty, never talking down to Amalia, never acting like the questions were intrusive. By the end of the afternoon, Amalia had declared Veda the coolest person ever and made Veda promise to teach her more signs. In the parking lot, after Amalia had run ahead to the car, Veda caught Torrin's arm. "She's wonderful," she signed, "curious and kind and so smart." "She likes you," Torrin signed, "really likes you. She doesn't warm up to people easily anymore, not since Mireia died. Thank you for trusting me with her." Torrin pulled Veda into a hug, their first real physical contact beyond hand-holding. She fit perfectly against him, her chair at just the right height for her to rest her head against his chest. He could feel her heart beating, fast and strong. "Thank you for being someone I can trust her with," he signed when they pulled apart. The weeks turned into months. Autumn gave way to winter, and their relationship deepened into something neither had anticipated when they'd met in that cafe. Torrin brought Veda home to meet his mother on a cold December evening. His mother, Eleanor, had been cautiously hopeful when Torrin first mentioned he was seeing someone. When he'd explained that Veda was deaf, Eleanor had cried happy tears and signed, "Finally! Finally someone who understands our world." The meeting went better than Torrin could have hoped. Eleanor and Veda connected immediately, signing rapidly about everything from Portland's terrible public transportation accessibility to their shared frustration with people who treated deafness like a tragedy. Amalia translated occasionally when Eleanor's signs were too fast for Veda to follow, proud to be the bridge between her grandmother and Veda. "She's special," Eleanor signed to Torrin in the kitchen while Veda and Amalia looked at a photo album in the living room.
Don't let her go.
I'm trying not to, Torin signed back.
Are you in love with her? The question stopped Torin mid-sign. Was he? It had been 3 months since that chaotic first date. 3 months of learning Veda's favorite coffee order, her design process, the way she bit her lip when she was concentrating. 3 months of watching her interact with Amalia, teaching his daughter that disability wasn't something to pity or fear. 3 months of feeling lighter than he had since Maria died. Yeah, he signed finally. Yeah, I think I am. Eleanor smiled. Then tell her. Life's too short to keep those words inside. But Torin didn't tell Veda. Not yet, because there was something he needed to do first, something that had been building in his mind since their third date. In early January, on a Friday evening when Amalia was sleeping over at Eleanor's house, Torin took Veda to Cedar Hills Rehabilitation Center. Why are we here? Veda signed as Torin unlocked the main entrance with his staff card key. There's something I want to show you, he signed back. The building was empty after hours, their footsteps and wheelchair wheels echoing through corridors Veda clearly remembered. Torin watched her face as they moved through the familiar spaces, the reception area, the main therapy room, the parallel bars where patients learned to walk again.
These parallel bars, Veda signed, reaching out to touch them. Her hands trembled slightly. I remember these. I spent hours here learning to transfer from my chair, learning that my body was different now, but still mine. She turned to look at Torin, her expression vulnerable in the dim hallway light. And I remember crying in that hallway over there, right by the water fountain, after Andrew left me. I'd just turned 26. I was newly paralyzed and going deaf, and the person I loved most decided I wasn't worth the effort anymore. Torin pulled a rolling stool close, sitting so they were eye level. He took Veda's hands in his. Do you know what I thought when I first saw you at that cafe? When I realized Stellan had lied and you weren't disabled at all? I thought, here we go again. Another person who's going to try to fix me or pity me or treat me like a charity case. I was so angry, so hurt. I wanted to leave before you could reject me first. She paused, gathering courage. Torin stayed silent, just holding her hands, letting her say what she needed to say. But here's what I need you to understand now, 3 months later. I'm not a project. I'm not someone to rescue. I have a full life, my design work, my friends, my independence. Yes, I need accommodations and adaptive equipment, but I don't need someone to save me. Her eyes met his directly, unflinching. So if you're here because you feel sorry for me, or because you think healing me will somehow heal your own grief, you need to tell me now, because I'm falling for you, Torin, and I can't survive another Andrew. I can't survive another person who says they love me, but can't handle the reality of who I am.
The words hung between them in the empty rehabilitation center, in the place where Veda had learned to survive, and Torin had learned to help others survive. Torin felt his own eyes filling with tears. He thought about the past 3 months, how he'd started looking forward to their dates with an excitement he hadn't felt since before Maria got sick. How Amalia now asked about Veda every single day, had started trying to sign full sentences instead of just individual words. How Eleanor had pulled him aside and told him not to let this woman go. He thought about Maria, who'd fought so hard to stay, who'd made him promise through tears that he wouldn't shut himself away forever. You deserve to be happy again, she had whispered near the end, her voice already fading. Promise me you'll let yourself love again. And here was Veda, who had faced unimaginable challenges with grace and strength, who wasn't asking him to rescue her, but simply to see her, really see her, and stay anyway. Torin released one of Veda's hands and began signing with trembling fingers. I'm here because 3 months ago, I walked into a cafe for what I thought would be the world's most awkward blind date, and I met someone extraordinary, someone who challenged me, who made me laugh, who taught my daughter that different doesn't mean less. Someone who called me out when I said something ableist without thinking, who showed me blind spots I didn't know I had.
He paused, making sure she was following, that she could see every word in the dim light. I'm not here to fix you. You're not broken. I'm not here to replace Mireia. Nobody could be that, and I wouldn't want them to be. She was Amalia's mother, my first love, and I'll always carry that. But I'm here because when I'm with you, I remember what it feels like to be more than just tired, to be more than just a single dad going through the motions, counting down hours until I can collapse into bed and start over. Torin's signs became more emphatic, more passionate. That first date, when you were crying and telling me to leave, that was the moment I knew you were real, because you didn't perform for me. You didn't try to make me comfortable or present some polished version of yourself. You showed me your pain and your anger and your fear. And somehow, despite the terrible setup and the tears and the worst possible first impression, we connected, really connected.
He took both her hands again, holding them gently. And I'm falling for you too. Not because you use a wheelchair, not because you're deaf, not despite those things either. I'm falling for you because of who you are. Brilliant and funny and beautiful and stubborn and passionate and real. The whole package. Everything you are. Exactly as you are. Veda brought her hands to her face, fresh tears streaming down her cheeks. When she looked up, her eyes were swimming, but bright with something like hope. She spoke aloud then, her voice thick with emotion, the words slightly slurred but unmistakable. Promise me this is real. Torin stood, gently pulling her up with him, then into his arms. He held her close, feeling her tears soak into his shirt. Then he pulled back just enough to sign where she could see. It's real. It's so real. Veda kissed him then. Their first kiss, 3 months after that chaotic coffee shop meeting. It was soft and sweet and tasted like tears and hope and new beginnings. When they finally pulled apart, both were crying, both smiling. I love you, Veda signed. Is it too soon to say that? I love you. I love you too, Torin signed back. And no, it's not too soon. Not when it's true. They stayed in that empty rehabilitation center for another hour, sitting in the hallway where Veda had once cried over Andrew's abandonment, where she'd learned to be strong, where she'd rebuilt herself from the ground up. But this time she wasn't alone. This time someone was choosing to stay. Over the following months, Torin and Veda navigated their relationship with honesty and patience. They had arguments about Veda's insistence on always being independent when accepting help would be easier, about Torin's tendency to take on too much and burn himself out. They faced challenges together, inaccessible venues that forced last-minute plan changes, strangers who stared or made thoughtless comments, moments of frustration when the world wasn't built for wheelchairs or deaf communication. But they also discovered unexpected joys.
The intimacy of sign language conversations in crowded rooms, where they could communicate without anyone else understanding. The creativity required to plan accessible adventures, finding hiking trails with paved paths, choosing restaurants not just for food, but for physical accessibility. The depth of connection that came from truly seeing each other, from building something real on a foundation of honest communication. They'd met Torin's colleagues at the rehabilitation center. She gave a presentation about accessible design and disability representation in media. Torin watched from the back of the room as she commanded the space with confidence and expertise, and felt his chest swell with pride. Amalia started calling Veda by her name with such casual affection that it made both adults tear up. Eleanor taught Veda family signs, special gestures that had been passed down through generations of deaf communication, shared only with people who truly belonged. In April, they took Amalia to the coast for spring break. They built sandcastles, collected shells, watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. Amalia fell asleep in the car on the drive home, exhausted and happy. Torin saw Veda watching the sleeping child with such tenderness that he just knew, what he needed to do. He'd been carrying the ring in his pocket for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment. He bought it with Eleanor's blessing and Amalia's enthusiastic approval.
A simple silver band with a small emerald, Veda's birthstone. 9 months after that chaotic first date at Metal Art Cafe, on a warm summer evening in June, Torin took Veda to Washington Park. The rose garden was in full bloom, the air heavy with fragrance, and the golden light of approaching sunset.
They found a quiet spot, away from the main paths. Amalia had wanted to come, had begged to be part of this moment, but Torin had gently explained that some things needed to be just between grown-ups first. She'd understand when she was older. "Why did you bring me here?" Veda signed, smiling. "Not that I'm complaining, it's beautiful." Torin's hands were shaking as he signed back. "Because 9 months ago, I walked into a cafe expecting an awkward blind date. I found you instead." "We've been over this," Veda signed, laughing. "Worst setup ever. We should send Stellan a thank you card for his terrible matchmaking." "Wait," Torin signed. Then he dropped to one knee. Veda's eyes went wide, her hands flew to her mouth. Torin pulled out the ring box, opening it slowly. Then he began signing, each gesture deliberate and full of love. He'd practiced this for weeks with Amalia's help, wanting every word to be perfect. "Veda Brooks, that first date you were crying. You told me to leave. You expected me to see you as pathetic, as someone to pity or fix. But I saw someone extraordinary, someone brave and honest and real." His signs continued, tears forming in his eyes. "You've taught me what it means to truly see someone. You've shown Amalia that strength comes in all forms. You've made me laugh again, made me excited about the future again, made me remember that surviving and living are different things." He held up the ring. "I'm not asking you to complete me. You've shown me that's not how this works. But I am asking you to build a life with me, to be Amalia's stepmother, to be my partner in all the chaos and joy and challenge that comes with our messy, beautiful, complicated lives. Will you marry me?" For a long moment, Veda just stared at him, tears streaming down her face. Then her hands came up, shaking violently, and she signed a single word. "Yes." Torin slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into a kiss that tasted like salt and joy. When they pulled apart, both crying, both laughing, Veda cupped his face in her hands. "I love you," she spoke aloud, her voice breaking with emotion. "I love you so much." "I love you too," Torin signed back. Then, because he could, because she was his now and he was hers, he said it again and again, signing and speaking simultaneously, filling the rose garden with declarations of love in 2 languages. When they told Amalia that evening, Torin had texted Eleanor to bring her to the park. The 7-year-old screamed with delight and threw herself at both of them, nearly knocking Veda out of her chair. "I'm going to have a mom again," Amalia signed frantically, her grammar terrible but her emotion clear. "A real mom. Veda's going to be my mom." "If that's okay with you," Veda signed carefully. "It's more than okay." Amalia hugged her again, then pulled back. "Can I call you Mom, or do you want me to use your name? What do stepmoms like to be called?" Veda's face was wet with tears again. "Whatever feels right to you, sweetheart. There's no wrong answer." Amalia thought for a moment, then signed decisively. "Mom. I want to call you Mom. Is that okay?" "More than okay," Veda signed back. "It's perfect." Eleanor pulled Torin aside while Veda and Amalia chattered excitedly about wedding plans, their signs flying so fast neither could fully keep up. "Your father would be proud, and Nerea would be too. This is good, Torin. This is right." "I know," Torin signed back. "For the first time in 3 years, I know."
The wedding took place 3 months later, in September, in the same rose garden where Torin had proposed. It was small, just family and close friends. Stellan stood as best man, still apologizing periodically for his terrible matchmaking, even though Torin kept insisting it had worked out. Amalia was flower girl, scattering petals with such enthusiasm that half of them ended up in the audience. The ceremony was conducted in both English and ASL, with an interpreter for the hearing guests who didn't sign. When the officiant asked if anyone objected, Amalia loudly proclaimed, "No way! This is the best thing ever!" The laughter that followed was warm and genuine. When Torin and Vida exchanged vows, signing them to each other while the interpreter spoke for the audience, there wasn't a dry eye in the garden. They promised to see each other truly, to honor each other's strengths and struggles, to build a life of honest communication and mutual respect. "I choose you," Torin signed. "Every day I choose you." "I choose you too," Vida signed back. "Thank you for staying when I asked you to leave. Thank you for seeing me." The kiss they shared when they were pronounced married was met with applause and cheers. Amalia signed, "Finally!" with such dramatic flair that even Vida, in the middle of her first kiss as a married woman, started laughing. At the reception, Stellan gave a toast that began with, "So, I may have slightly mishandled their first date setup," and ended with, "But look at them now. Sometimes terrible ideas have beautiful endings." Eleanor danced with Vida, both women signing to each other as they moved, sharing a moment of connection that transcended the party around them. Torin danced with Amalia, her smile so wide it seemed to split her face. As the sun set and the fairy lights came on, Torin found Vida sitting alone for a moment, watching the celebration unfold. "What are you thinking about?" he signed, sitting beside her.
"That coffee shop," Veda signed. 9 months ago, I was sitting in that doorway, absolutely convinced my life was never going to get better. Convinced I'd always be alone. Convinced the best I could hope for was managing my disappointment." She turned to look at him. "And then you sat down. You didn't leave when I told you to. You saw me at my absolute worst, crying, angry, humiliated, and you chose to stay." "Best decision I ever made," Torin signed. "Mine too," Veda signed back. "Agreeing to start over, giving us a real chance." She took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "I love you, husband." "I love you, wife," Torin signed with his free hand. They sat together as the party continued around them, as Amalia danced with other children, as Eleanor chatted with relatives, as the world moved forward. Two people who'd been broken by loss, who'd met at their absolute worst, who'd chosen honesty over performance, and built something real on a foundation of mutual respect and deep understanding. If you believe in second chances at love, if you've ever found something beautiful in the wreckage of your plans, hit that subscribe button. Let's build a community of people who know that sometimes the best things in life come from the moments we least expect. Love isn't about perfect first impressions. It's not about meeting someone at your best, polished and prepared. Sometimes it's about being seen at your worst, crying in a coffee shop doorway, convinced you're unlovable, and having someone choose to stay anyway. It's about finding someone who doesn't need you to be fixed or saved, who sees your wheelchair and your hearing aids and your scars, and loves you not despite them and not because of them, but because they're part of the whole, complex, beautiful person you are. It's about two people showing up honestly, bringing all their grief and baggage and fear, and deciding that together is better than alone. Torin and Veda's story began with tears, with humiliation and anger, and the kind of vulnerability that only comes from being hurt too many times before. It began with Stellan's well-meaning but terrible matchmaking, with lies and misunderstandings and every reason to walk away. But they stayed. They chose honesty. They chose to see each other truly. And in doing so, they found something neither had been looking for, but both desperately needed. A partner who understood that strength isn't about being unbroken. It's about how you rebuild yourself and how you help the person you love rebuild too. Sometimes the best love stories begin with tears. Sometimes they begin in coffee shops with terrible setups and worse first impressions. Sometimes they begin when someone looks at you at your absolute lowest and says, simply and honestly, "I'm not leaving." And sometimes, if you're very lucky, Those stories end in rose gardens, with rings and promises and the knowledge that you found someone who will choose you every single day, exactly as you are. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that it's never too late for love, that broken doesn't mean unworthy, that your scars are part of your story, but not the end of it, please share this video. Someone out there needs to hear it today. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that remind us all what really matters. Thank you for staying with me until the end. Just like Torin stayed for Veda. Just like they stayed for each other.